Okay, today we are going to talk about should you pay for a golf club fitting? Let's go. Hi everyone, welcome to the Mobile Club Maker. I'm AJ. I hope you're having a wonderful day. So it seems like anytime anyone has a question about golf equipment, one of the stock answers or the most popular answer is always, well, go get a fitting. So what I wanted to look at today is, well, there's a bunch of different fittings out there, different kinds of fittings. Obviously, they cost different amounts of money. Some of them are quite expensive. Some of them are free. How do they all stack up? What are the pros and cons? So we're going to look at the three most sort of common types of fittings, that being your standard golf retail store, big box store kind of fitting, a demo day fitting, and then your more boutique, more high-end fitting. We're going to look at those three types of fittings, talk about what I like, maybe what I don't like about them, and maybe, hopefully, you have a little better idea of which of these is going to be the best fit for you and your game. Okay, so the first kind of fitting I want to talk about would be your sort of big box store, golf retail store kind of fitting. What are the pros of this sort of fitting? Well, the first one is obviously going to be they're very inexpensive, if not free in most cases. You are, in most cases, not going to be charged for this kind of fitting. This is just sort of your basic hitting the big items when you're talking about fitting for a golf club. So we're talking about length, we're talking about lie, we're talking about shaft flex, we're talking about set makeup, those kinds of things. The big picture things. Secondly, they're obviously very widely available. Pretty much any golf retailer is going to have somebody there who can go through this fitting process with you and hopefully get you dialed in at least at some level to clubs that are going to fit you appropriately with, again, these major measurements. Third thing is you will have an opportunity in most cases to try out a wide variety of golf clubs. So, most of the major brands, if this is a major golf retailer, they're going to be covering or they're going to have available to you all the big brands that you can try out. The last of the pros, and I put sort of a question mark on this, but in general, they are going to be what we would say is unbiased, right? They're not going to be probably pushing you into one club more than the other. Now, I realized, having been in the golf business for a long time, there are incentives out there in different retail environments for selling certain kinds of clubs. But in general, those incentives really from one brand to the next, if you're talking about the major golf manufacturers, the incentive difference is usually pretty darn small. So it's one thing if you're talking about maybe a house brand, like a brand that is owned by that particular retailer where there might be more of a commission. But in general, if you're looking at TaylorMade versus, Callaway versus Cobra versus whoever, it's all going to be pretty similar. So I would say in general, you're not going to find much bias there. They're going to let you hit whatever you want to hit and not really try and overly steer you in one direction or the other. The last pro in this kind of setup is what I would call transparent equipment prices. When you decide that you're going to get a set of clubs, the prices are very, straightforward. They're right in front of you. You know what the price of the clubs are. If you decide to go with maybe a slightly different shaft, an upgrade shaft that's offered from the manufacturer, they're going to have that price right there in front of you. Everything is basically laid out in front of you. Very clear, very simple. Okay, so what are the cons of this sort of fitting process? Well, obviously, the first one would be you're hitting indoors, which means you're hitting off of mats and you're hitting into a screen within a little confined box, a little cube. And I know some people will try and argue that the mats are just as good as grass if you've got the good quality mats, but I'm sorry, for me, there is no substitute for grass. So that is a strike against them. However, obviously in most cases, most golf retailers do not have an actual grass range that you can hit off of. So it's sort of, you just have to sort of accept that because that's what is practical and what is going to be most readily available to you. The second con would be the selection can be somewhat limited as far as what you're actually able to try out. So if you're wanting to try out a few different shafts or 4 different iron shafts or different driver shafts, you're probably going to be limited in what these major golf retailers are going to have available to you, especially when you get into if we're talking about the more premium, the more aftermarket, high-end graphite shafts where you're talking about $300, $400 shafts, they're probably not going to just have these readily available sitting around that you can demo. Next, we're going to talk about, well, how about demo day fittings? Now, when I say demo day fittings, I'm really talking about a brand specific demo day. So, Ping comes out to the golf course to do a fitting, or TaylorMade comes out to your golf course to do fittings. Obviously, the first pro, what I would consider the biggest pro of this sort of setup, is that in most cases you're going to be able to hit on an actual driving range and hit off of actual grass, which especially when we're talking about irons or even fairway woods, I think is a huge pro. Drivers, not as big a deal hitting off of grass, but obviously being able to still see the ball flying through the air, I think is a benefit. But especially for irons or fairway woods, or if you were looking at wedges especially, I would definitely want to be hitting off of grass. So that is probably the biggest pro. Again, another pro is going to be the pricing is going to be very straightforward in this case. They're going to be able to tell you the exact prices. All the clubs are going to be made by the manufacturer, so they're going to be able to put together those prices very simply for you. Okay, so now the cons of a demo day style of fitting. Well, obviously, if you know what brand you are interested in, and you're interested in, say, TaylorMade, you go to a TaylorMade demo day, you're going to be all set. However, if you're not sure about what brands you're interested in, if you're wanting to try numerous brands, well, obviously this kind of fitting is not going to be a good fit for you because it is extremely limited in what they're going to be providing. They're only going to be providing one brand. Also, on top of that, again, if you're interested in more premium aftermarket shafts, more exotic stuff like that, different grips, again, you're probably going to be facing a limited selection of what those reps, of what those specific brand fitters are going to be bringing out to a demo day. They're probably only going to have, in general, a handful of different shafts, probably the most popular stuff, obviously some more of the stock option stuff. So, okay, lastly, we come to the boutique style fitting businesses. These are the high-end fitting companies that you see advertised on TV or on different websites or in different golf magazines. There's a bunch of different ones out there at this point, but they all hold to a pretty similar system of how they go through the process. Okay, the first big benefit of this sort of fitting is going to be the selection. They have a very large selection. They're going to have all the major heads from your current production line of most of the major big brands, and you're going to have a lot of different shaft options, a lot of different aftermarket shaft options that are more exotic that you may not be able to find in other fitting experiences. The second thing is they are really going to sort of take their time with you. I don't think in most cases they are going to rush you through the process. You go through this, this fitting experience, and it is sort of a very elaborate, thorough process to get you in the right equipment. So if you're wanting to sort of take your time and not feel rushed, this can be a good option. Next pro for them, they are going to have, in general, probably the highest end launch monitors that you can get. They're going to be using TrackMans, they're going to be using GC quads, they're going to be using the higher end launch monitors. So if you're really wanting that super accurate data, or as accurate as you're going to get with any of these launch monitors, these are going to be better options. Not to say that some of the retail fitters or some of the demo days won't have this same equipment. They may or may not, but I would say it's going to be a little bit more inconsistent as far as what you will find versus these high-end fitters. You're pretty well guaranteed they're going to have high-end launch monitors. The last pro, and again, this one I put a bit of a question mark on, but they always advertise themselves as being brand agnostic. They don't care what brand you buy, at least according to all their advertising. They just want you in the right equipment. Okay, so the cons of this sort of boutique fitting. Well, obviously the first one is going to be cost. The price of the actual fittings is going to be far more expensive, especially if you compare that to free. It's going to be a much more expensive process. So you're talking about probably on the low end for something like wedge or putter fittings around $100, and going up from there for your drivers, obviously your iron fittings being more, and if you do sort of a full bag or a half bag fitting, the prices are going to go up from there. I think they go up to around $300 for a fitting. Another con when it comes to this sort of fitting, again, just like when we're talking about the retail store fittings, is in most cases, and there are a few exceptions, but in most cases you are going to be hitting indoors, you are going to be hitting off a mat into a screen, which, as we've already talked about, is not ideal, but in most cases it's just something you have to accept if you want to be able to try out all this different equipment. So the next con, these boutique fitters really emphasize high-end aftermarket shafts. That's what they're trying to fit everyone into. That's just kind of part of their deal. So they're going to try and put you in, and they're going to have you test out a bunch of different expensive, more expensive than obviously the stock option, more exotic shafts. And while that might be good, in a lot of cases, many golfers are going to be perfectly fine and probably just as good in one of the stock shaft options. But you may not get that opportunity to actually try those depending on which fitting you go to, because they may not even offer you a chance to try the stock option shafts. So if you're looking at the stock option shafts, I would really sort of move back towards the retail store fitting as your better option. Now, as we've already said, they really emphasize these aftermarket high-end shafts, and I have to say personally I really kind of put that as a con against them, because yes, these shafts are great, they're, the quality is very good on them, they're nice looking shafts and all that, but I think they really sort of overemphasize or overvalue the importance of the shaft in the golf club. I would argue that if you have a good shaft that matches the specs that you need, it doesn't need to be, this ridiculously expensive aftermarket shafts. There's plenty of good stock option shafts available for the majority of golfers. So while it can be interesting and fun to try out some of these expensive exotic shafts, I don't necessarily think that those shafts are what most golfers really need. Okay, so the last con when it comes to these boutique fitters, this again goes back to pricing, but in this case we're not talking about the fitting price, we're talking about the actual build cost, because whereas these other types of fittings, when we're talking about your retail store fittings or we're talking about demo day fittings, I would consider them very transparent in the pricing if you actually go and order equipment from them. The pricing of equipment when you buy it from these boutique fitters can be a little more cloudy. It can be a little tricky to understand, and honestly, the prices can be rather overinflated versus what you're paying at a retail store or even at the demo day. Okay, I hope this was helpful. As you can see, the three main kinds of fittings, really deciding which one to do will be dictated by what you're looking for. Are you looking for more of the stock setup, sort of more of the basic options, or are you wanting to look at some of the more exotic, expensive materials? Are you more interested in one specific brand? All these things will sort of dictate what kind of fitting makes the most sense for you. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, please go down below, like, comment, subscribe, and definitely hit that bell icon so you can be alerted when I post new videos. I am now on Patreon, so if you're interested in supporting me there, you can find me at AJ Golf. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me at Mobile Club Maker. We will see you next time. Bye.